My name is Daniel, and I am 25 years old. I've always been the one who copes. This phrase has haunted me since childhood, like a shadow clinging to my heels. Daniel is strong, he'll cope, my parents would say, smiling encouragingly at me. But in their words, I heard not only praise but also an unspoken expectation, even a demand. I had to cope, and I did. It became my role, my mask, my identity, etched onto my heart like a brand. From a very young age, I was taught self-reliance as if it were the highest virtue, the only path to success and respect. While other children cried when falling off their bikes and ran to their parents for comfort, I was told to get up and keep going. There was no time for tears, no room for weakness. "Man up, you're a man," my father's voice would say, even when I was just a child, with scraped knees and trembling lips. These words, seemingly spoken with love and care, imprinted themselves on my consciousness, shaping my perception of myself and the world. When I got bad grades, it was explained to me that it was my responsibility, and I had to find a way to fix the situation. There was no indulgence, no excessive coddling. Instead, there was constant faith in my abilities, which, on the one hand, hardened my character, made me persistent and goal-oriented, but on the other hand, left me alone with my problems, with the feeling that my worth was determined solely by my ability to solve these problems independently. I studied well, even excellently. School, high school, university, everything came relatively easily to me, although behind the scenes were hours of hard work, sleepless nights over textbooks, and declining meetings with friends to prepare for exams. I didn't allow myself to relax, didn't allow myself to ask for help. After all, Daniel will cope. Asking for help meant admitting weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. I started working part-time at 16, handing out flyers in the biting cold, working as a waiter in a noisy restaurant where I had to navigate between tables with a tray full of hot dishes and listen to the whims of customers. Then, having acquired programming skills, I started freelancing, creating websites and applications for small clients. By the time I graduated from university, I already had decent work experience and a portfolio that would impress any employer. I quickly found a good job in an IT company, and my career took off. I worked hard, took on complex projects, striving to prove my competence and value. My parents were proud of me, and I felt satisfaction from my achievements, from recognition from colleagues and superiors. But somewhere deep down, a feeling of weariness and loneliness was growing. Weariness from the constant tension, from the need to always be strong, from loneliness because behind the mask of the one who copes, no one saw the real me, with my fears, doubts, and need for simple human warmth. My younger brother, Alex, was my complete opposite, like a mirror image created from a different template. From childhood, he was surrounded by care and protection, like a fragile flower requiring constant attention and shelter from life's harsh winds. He was still little, even when he stopped being so, delicate, creative, adjectives that seemed to justify any display of weakness or dependence. He was forgiven for tantrums that would have earned me a stern reprimand. He was bought expensive toys that I could only dream of, gazing at them in store windows. He was excused from household chores that were an integral part of my life. If Alex struggled with something, his parents rushed to help, solving all his problems for him, as if he were incapable of handling them on his own. "He's still young. He can't do it himself," they would say, justifying their overprotective nature, not realizing that they were depriving him of the opportunity to learn from his mistakes, to become stronger and more independent. Alex grew up in an atmosphere of permissiveness and confidence that the world owed him something, that his desires should be fulfilled by default. He was charming and sociable, easily found common ground with people, knew how to ingratiate himself. But at the same time, he was completely unadapted to independent life. Studies were difficult for him. He often changed hobbies, jumping from one to another, never finishing anything, as if the search for himself was an endless process that didn't require concrete results. His parents paid for his tutors, his hobbies, his entertainment, believing they were investing in his development, not noticing that they were actually indulging his infantilism and irresponsibility. At 20, Alex was in his third year of university, skipping classes and indulging in parties, living entirely at his parents' expense and not thinking about the future, confident that his parents would always be there to solve any of his problems. The difference in our upbringing was obvious, like day and night, like black and white. But I tried not to pay attention to it, to suppress the growing feeling of resentment and injustice. I understood that my parents loved us both, just expressed their love differently, in accordance with their ideas about what was best for each of us. Or, at least, I tried to convince myself of this, finding rational explanations for their behavior to maintain a semblance of family harmony. But resentment accumulated, like slowly dripping water, eroding the stone of my patience, penetrating into the most secluded corners of my soul, poisoning the joy of my own achievements, and causing a deep sense of loneliness. I felt invisible, as if my ability to cope made me non-existent in my parents' eyes, depriving me of the right to their love and attention. My 25th birthday was approaching, like an impending storm foreshadowing changes that I had not yet realized. I wasn't expecting anything special. Usually, my parents limited themselves to perfunctory congratulations, a standard card with banal wishes, and maybe a small symbolic gift, like a new shirt or a book that I was unlikely to read. I was used to it, and frankly, didn't expect more. After all, Daniel will cope. I could afford to buy myself everything I needed and even more. My salary allowed me to live quite comfortably, buy myself expensive things, travel, but money couldn't fill the void that had formed in my soul due to a lack of emotional closeness and recognition. That evening, on my birthday, we gathered as a family in our house. There was a festive dinner on the table, prepared by my mother, diligently, with love, as she always did. Even if this love was selective, congratulations and toasts were made, delivered perfunctorily, without much enthusiasm, like a ritual that had to be performed. Everything was, as usual, calm and predictable, like a script written many years ago and repeated year after year. After dinner, when dessert had been eaten and conversations had subsided, my parents announced that they had a gift for me. I smiled, a polite, strained smile, expecting to see something modest and practical as always. Maybe a new tie or another book that would add to the dusty collection on the shelf. My mother handed me a beautiful card, bright, with glitter, as if intended for a child, not an adult man. I took it, thanked her, opened it, and read the standard birthday greetings, written in my mother's calligraphic handwriting. Words devoid of sincerity and warmth, just a set of formal phrases. A polite smile appeared on my face, which reflected nothing but politeness. Inside, there was nothing. No joy, no surprise, no disappointment. Just emptiness. A cold, all-consuming emptiness. Like a black hole ready to swallow all my emotions. A card. As if I were a child who just needed a piece of sparkly paper to feel happy and loved. Having finished with the congratulations, my parents turned to Alex. "And for you, son, we have a special surprise," my father said solemnly, with the intonation of a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and my mother brought a tray into the room with keys on it. Car keys. A new car. Shiny, modern, clearly expensive. The brand I myself dreamed of but couldn't afford, believing there were more important expenses. I froze. Time seemed to stop. The world around ceased to exist. A vacuum arose in my head. An emptiness in which there was no room for thoughts or feelings, which gradually filled with a deafening ringing of bewilderment and resentment, growing like an explosive wave. Alex? A car? Why? He's 20 years old, he doesn't work, he's a full-time university student, if you can even call it studying, and all his expenses are paid for by his parents. He only got his driver's license 6 months ago, and even then, more for entertainment than out of real necessity. And me? Me who had been earning my own living since I was 18, who had helped my parents financially when they were in trouble, who had never asked for anything except understanding and support, which I never received. I got a card like a handout, like a mockery, like a symbol of my insignificance in their eyes. "Well, you don't need it as much, Daniel," my mother said, as if reading my thoughts, as if justifying her injustice, but only exacerbating it. "You can buy everything for yourself." Her words sounded not like comfort, but like a sentence, like the final confirmation of my second-class status. As if my ability to cope automatically deprived me of the right to care and attention, as if my independence was not a virtue, but a burden that I had to bear silently and meekly, not expecting gratitude or recognition. At that moment, something broke inside me. The last drop overflowed the cup of patience that had been accumulating for years. All the accumulated resentment, all the injustice, all of it burst out, but not in the form of a scream or tears, not in an emotional outburst, but in the form of icy calm, in indifference that was worse than any anger. I didn't argue, didn't try to sort things out, didn't make a scene, because I understood that it was useless, that they wouldn't understand, wouldn't hear. I just smiled, a strained, unnatural smile, thanked my parents for the card, as if accepting the rules of their game, and got up from the table. "I need to rest." I said quietly, in a voice that held no emotion, no reproach, and went to my room, closing the door behind me as if shutting myself off from the whole world. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it with my back and took a deep breath. It was quiet and dark in the room. Only a faint moonlight penetrated through the cracks in the curtains, creating bizarre shadows on the walls. On the table lay an unfinished novel, gathering dust for several months. On a chair hung a shirt that I was going to wear to work tomorrow, a symbol of my routine, my predictable but so empty life. Everything as usual, but inside me, everything had turned upside down, collapsed to the foundation. I could no longer stay here, could no longer play the role of the one who copes, in a family where they didn't see me and didn't value me, where my worth was measured by my ability to be convenient and invisible. I went to the closet and started packing. The movements were mechanical, as if I was acting under hypnosis, as if my body was acting separately from my mind, obeying an instinct for self-preservation. I wasn't planning an escape, wasn't thinking about what I would do next, wasn't making any plans. I just wanted to leave this lie, this hypocrisy, this perpetual feeling of my uselessness, this role that was suffocating me, taking away my individuality, turning me into a shadow of myself. I took my passport, driver's license, bank cards, a little cash, everything that might be needed to start a new life, a life without looking back at the past. I put a few changes of underwear, a toothbrush, a phone charger, a minimal set of things necessary for survival into my backpack. I threw on a jacket, the only warm thing that was at hand, and left the room. In the living room, my parents and Alex were still sitting at the table, discussing something cheerful, laughing and joking, as if nothing had happened, as if my departure would change nothing. They didn't even notice me leaving, or pretended not to notice, immersed in their own world, where there was no place for me. I quietly closed the front door and went out into the street. The night city greeted me with cool air and streetlights, flickering like stars in a cold sky. I walked at random, not knowing where I was going, having no purpose, just obeying the instinct to flee. I just wanted to get as far away as possible from this house, from this family, from this role that was suffocating me, destroying my personality. An hour later, the phone rang. My mother's number appeared on the screen. I hesitated, doubting whether to answer, whether to engage in a conversation that would change nothing. But I answered anyway. "Daniel, where are you? We're worried." Her voice trembled. There were notes of panic, anxiety in it, but not sincere concern, but rather irritation that I had disrupted their usual way of life. "I've left," I replied calmly, in an even voice, trying to keep my voice from betraying my emotions so they wouldn't see my pain, my resentment, my resolve. "You always said that I could do everything myself, so I decided that I can live without you." Silence reigned on the other end of the line, a heavy, oppressive silence, and then agitated voices rang out, interrupting each other, full of incomprehension and irritation. "Daniel, what are you saying? Come back immediately. We didn't mean that. We wanted what was best." My father shouted into the phone, his voice breaking into a cry, full of anger and incomprehension. My mother was crying and begging me to come back, promising that everything would be different, that they would change. But I didn't believe her words. I had heard them too many times before. Alex was silent, a silence more eloquent than any words, tacit agreement with his parents' position, tacit condemnation of my action. But I had already made a decision. There was no turning back. I felt as if I had thrown off a heavy burden from my shoulders that had been pressing on me for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt freedom. Freedom from expectations, freedom from obligations, freedom from the role of the one who copes that had been imposed on me against my will. "I'm sorry, but I'm not coming back," I said firmly, cutting off all paths of retreat. "I need time to figure myself out and my feelings. Don't call me anymore." And I hung up the phone, severing the last thread connecting me to my past life. I spent the first night in a cheap hostel on the outskirts of the city, in a cramped room with an unpleasant smell of dampness, among strangers, but feeling freer than ever in my prosperous family. In the morning, I rented a small one-room apartment in another area. Small, uncomfortable, but my own. I started a new life. A life in which I myself set my own rules, made my own decisions, took responsibility for my actions, without looking back at the expectations and assessments of others. My parents called, wrote, came to my work, tried to find me through mutual acquaintances, using all available means to bring me back on the right path, in their understanding. But I didn't answer calls, didn't read messages. avoided meetings, like a ghost dissolved in the city crowd. I understood that they were hurt and offended, that they considered themselves victims of my ingratitude. But I needed my own peace of mind more, the restoration of my own personality, destroyed by years of suppression and non-recognition. I had to prove to myself and to them that I could live without their constant evaluation and comparisons, that my worth did not depend on their opinion, that I had the right to my own life, to my own feelings, to my own happiness. Several months have passed. During this time, I have not communicated with my parents even once. At first, it was hard. I missed home, the familiar way of life, my mother's food, the evenings spent in the living room, even despite all their falseness. But with each day, I became more confident in my decision. I realized that sometimes it's better to be alone than to be around those who don't value and don't understand you, who see you only as a function, not a person. I began to value myself, my feelings, my desires, to learn to listen to my inner voice, which had previously been drowned out by the voices of others. I stopped coping for others and started coping for myself, for my own well-being, for my own happiness. This story did not end with a happy ending in the classic sense. I am not sure that I will ever be able to fully restore relations with my parents, to return their former warmth and closeness. The wounds are too deep. Too much resentment and misunderstanding has accumulated over these years. But I know I made the right choice. I chose myself. I chose freedom. And in this freedom, I found true strength, which turned out to be much more than just the ability to cope with everything. It was the strength to be myself, the strength to choose my own path, the strength to love and value myself for who I am, even if it meant leaving home and starting over. And perhaps, someday, in the future, when the wounds heal, when time heals old grievances, we will be able to find common ground and build new, healthier relationships, based on mutual respect and understanding, and not on expectations and comparisons. But for now, I need time and space to heal old wounds and grow into the person I want to be, and not who others are used to seeing me as. And this, perhaps, is the most important coping in my life. Coping with myself, finding my true self, and building my life according to my own script. What would you do if you were Daniel? Have you ever encountered anything like this in your life? Share your stories in the comments, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.